Hello and welcome to the course Social Behavior and the Brain, an Introduction to Social Neuroscience. I am Dr. Arik Verma, an Associate Professor at the Department of Cognitive Science, IIT Kanpur. This is the 7th week and we are going to be talking about manipulating frontal cortical activity with respect to anger. Now, more recent research is consistent with the hypothesis that anger is associated with increased left frontal activity. For instance, De Alfonso and colleagues used slow RTMS to inhibit the left or the right frontal cortex, and why did they do so? Because slow RTMS actually produces inhibition of cortical excitability. And we were saying in the previous lecture that when people are angry, the left frontal cortex sort of becomes more activated, and the right frontal cortex basically tries to suppress that activity. So what these guys did was they used slow RTMS to inhibit the left and in some cases the right frontal cortex activity. Slow RTMS produces this inhibition of cortical excitability, so that the RTMS applied to the right PFC decreases its activation and causes the left PFC to become more active, in which case what will happen? People will experience more anger. So whereas right TMS, when it was applied to the left PFC, basically reduce the experience of anger or expression of anger, and it caused a higher activation of the right PFC. So it is done in a complementary manner. What did these researchers found? Okay, these researchers found that the RTMS applied to the right PFC caused selective attention towards angry faces. People's attention were being drawn more towards anger inducing stimuli, whereas RTMS applied to the left PFC caused selective attention away from the angry faces. Again, so this is in line what we have been talking so far. When the left prefrontal cortex is activated, then it will basically draw your attention towards anger inducing events. When the right prefrontal cortex is more activated, then it will take your attention away from anger inducing events. So an increase in left prefrontal cortex activity led participants to attentionally approach angry faces, as in an aggressive confrontation. So if you are seeing an angry face, it is causing anger in you, you are trying to approach it, it is an approach inclination. On the contrary, where there was an increase in right prefrontal activity, it led participants to additionally and diligently avoid angry faces, as for example in fear based avoidance, or let us say defensive aggression for that matter. Okay. And these results are not limited to this particular study, they have also been reported by other studies. For example, Van Honk and Schutter in 2006 also found reported very similar results. Now, the interpretation of these results, which basically these researchers advanced, concurs with other research that has demonstrated that attention towards angry faces is associated with high levels of cortisol production, which is actually associated with fear. So cortisol is a hormone that is involved, and it is basically associated when people become afraid. It is basically making your body ready for action, and this is basically what is happening in these scenarios as well. Now, the authors wanted to extend this work, so they extended the line of work which was produced by Van Honk and colleagues by examining whether a manipulation of asymmetrical frontal cortical activity would also affect behavioral aggression, actual action. Okay, based on past research that shows that contraction of the left hand increases right frontal activity and that of the right hand increases left frontal activity, the authors manipulated the asymmetrical frontal cortical activity by having participants either contract their left hand or their right hand. Then the participants received insulting feedback ostensibly from another participant. They then played a reaction time game on the computer against this other ostensible participant. Now, participants were told, remember anger is linked to approach motivation. So what will happen here? Participants were told that they could actually give this other participant who had previously insulted them either a blast of 60 decibels, 70 decibels, 80 decibels, 90 decibels or 100 decibels of white noise for up to 10 seconds, acting out their anger, opportunity to act out their anger. If they were fastest to press the shift key when an image appeared on the screen. As soon as a particular image appeared, they can press this shift key. The longer they press, the larger the amount of white noise shock that these other participants will receive. What did they find? Results showed that participants who squeezed with their right hand actually gave significantly louder and longer noise blasts to this other ostensible participant. So, this right hand contracting their right hand increased their left frontal cortical activity, allowed them to express anger more vehemently, and therefore these people provided significantly louder and longer noise blast to this other ostensible participant. Okay, so this is again very interesting, and this is obviously in contrast to people who were squeezing with their left hand. Their right frontal cortex would be more activated, the feelings of anger would be slightly dampened out. Now, it is not only that research in anger or frontal cortical activity for anger has been only investigated using EEG or ERP. There are other methods as well. For example, some studies on anger that have used brain imaging technologies other than EEG have also been conducted. For example, one PET study, in one study PET was measured while men were exposed to mental imagery scripts concerning angering or neutral events that occurred in their own lives. So, they were basically supposed to shown these mental imagery scripts, get imagine this happened, that happened, either events that would make them angry, or they were just neutral events about their own life. So, it is a more of an autobiographical scenario. What did they find? Results revealed that as compared to neutral imagery, anger imagery caused an increase in the left orbital frontal cortex activity, the right ACC activity, the bilateral anterior temporal poles, the left precentral gyrus, the bilateral medial frontal cortex, and also the bilateral cerebellum. All of these things you can see are linked with a significant inclination for approach and action. All right. Now, Doherty and colleagues basically looked at this, and they understood that the increase in the left orbital frontal cortical activity could be corresponding to inhibition of aggressive behavior in the face of anger. So, they said that this left orbital frontal, when we were talking about anger, we were talking about left frontal cortical activity, we are not talking about the orbital frontal. So, it is a slightly different region. Now, Doherty and colleagues think that while the anger was being experienced, the left orbital frontal cortical activity is basically trying to inhibit the aggressive behavior in face of anger. Okay. Although this interpretation is inconsistent with some speculations of the role of the left orbital frontal cortex in response inhibition, because there is a lot of work related to the frontal cortex and its role in inhibition and executive processes that does not really agree with this kind of a thing. It is inconsistent also with EEG results showing that increased left frontal cortical activity is associated with increased aggression and approach behavior. So, there you can see that there are a lot of times findings that may not agree with each other or be consistent with each other. Now, this interpretation that the left frontal cortical region is involved in the inhibition of anger and aggression is also inconsistent with lesion studies suggesting that mania results from damage to the right frontal region. It is not linked with the damage to left frontal region. It is linked with the damage to right frontal region, and the results obtained when the left related to the right frontal cortex is activated and angry attentional processes are measured. So, some of these results that are coming out from these PET or fMRI studies are somehow not found to be super consistent with the earlier EEG findings. Okay. So, there is obviously scope for more research in this area. Interestingly, EEG is most likely therefore assessing dorsolateral frontal cortical activity and not orbital frontal cortical activity, and left orbital frontal cortical activity may be involved in a different function. It may be involved in inhibition of anger, whereas left dorsolateral frontal activity may be involved in approach motivations like anger. So, to better understand this inconsistency of results, we have to understand that where is this EEG components that we were initially measuring coming from. It seems therefore that EEG is basically measuring the dorsolateral part of the frontal cortex, whereas the the orbital frontal cortex is not being measured. These other studies, the PET etc., are measuring a different part of that frontal cortex, and that is why the distinction in the roles they are playing pertaining to anger. So, this study by Doherty and colleagues did not really find an increase in the left dorsolateral frontal cortical activity, but their manipulation probably may not have evoked approach motivated anger. So, this is also something that maybe, again remember what I have been saying so far in neuroscience, what is very interesting or what is very important to remember actually is that the areas of the brain will respond to specific properties and specific task demands. Specific properties of the stimuli and the specific task demands. If the task demands are off even by a little, the same area might be getting activated, but it might be getting activated for a different reason altogether, as opposed to the reason that you have theorized and hypothesized about. So, anger induced realistically by things like insulting feedback or goal blocking, as was done in the EEG experiments, may actually have very different properties from imagined anger, as was produced by imagery in Doherty and colleagues' experiment. So, in the imagery experiments, correlations between reported anger and regional brain activity were not reported, whereas in the EEG experiment, self-reported anger has actually been found to correlate significantly with relative left frontal cortical activity too. So, here you can see that there is an extra validity associated with the EEG experiments, but not with the imagery experiments. A detailed examination of correlations between reported emotion and physiological measure is a very good thing, and it assists in determining whether the brain activation is actually related to the emotional experience in question, or it is coming because of some other non-emotional variable. So, this is again something that we really need to be very careful about when we are designing neuroimaging experiments with appropriately strong hypotheses. So, I will stop here. I will continue this discussion in the next lecture.